The blood on her doorstep was still fresh when Rose Langford saw it that October morning in 1883, dark and glistening in the early light like spilled wine, and she knew without question that Marcus Verne had found her again. Her hands trembled as she gripped the porch railing, staring down at what looked like a rabbit, its throat cleanly cut, positioned directly in front of her door. This was the third warning in as many weeks since she had arrived in Seligman, Arizona, thinking distance and desert heat would keep her safe from the man who had pursued her across 3 states. Rose had fled Kansas City after rejecting Marcus's proposal, after he had made it clear that her refusal meant nothing to him, that he would have her regardless of her wishes. She had watched his obsession grow from persistent courtship to something darker, something that sent ice through her veins whenever she caught sight of his tall figure watching her from across the street, always watching. Now he had tracked her here to this small trading town along the railroad, where red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels, and the air smelled of sage and dust. Rose had hoped the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory would swallow her trail, but Marcus Verne was not a man who gave up easily. His family owned half of Kansas City, and he was accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. She swept the dead animal off her porch with shaking hands, refusing to let tears fall. Rose had not come this far to crumble now. At 23, she had already buried her parents and survived the journey west alone, finding work as a seamstress in the small shop on Seligman's Main Street. The town was modest but growing, serving the railroad workers and cattlemen who passed through, and she had begun to build something resembling a life here. The sun climbed higher, burning away the cool morning air as Rose dressed for work. She pinned her dark auburn hair into a neat bun, smoothed her simple blue calico dress, and tried to steady her breathing. Through her small window, she could see the main street beginning to stir with activity. She would not let Marcus steal this from her. She would not run again. But as she stepped outside and locked her door, she felt eyes on her. Rose scanned the street, the storefronts, the alleyways between buildings. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the sensation persisted, crawling up her spine like a spider. She walked quickly toward the dress shop, her boots clicking on the wooden boardwalk, acutely aware of every shadow, every figure that moved in her peripheral vision. She had nearly reached the shop when she saw him. Marcus Verne stood across the street beside the general store, dressed in an expensive suit that looked absurdly formal for the dusty frontier town. His pale eyes locked onto hers, and he smiled, tipping his hat in a gesture that would have seemed polite to any observer but filled Rose with dread. He was handsome in a cold, precise way, with angular features and blonde hair slicked back from his forehead. Everything about him spoke of wealth and privilege, and the absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will. Rose forced herself to turn away and push through the door of the dress shop, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You are pale as a ghost," Mrs. Chen, the shop owner, said immediately. The older Chinese woman had been kind to Rose since her arrival, asking few questions and paying fair wages. "What has happened?" Rose considered lying but found she could not. "Someone I knew from Kansas City. He has found me." Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. "The man who made you leave," Rose nodded, sinking into the chair by the sewing table. Her fingers found a piece of fabric and began working it automatically, needing something to occupy her hands. "This is trouble," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Does he mean you harm?" "He means to possess me," Rose replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He believes I belong to him, that my wishes are irrelevant. When I refused to marry him, he began following me everywhere. He sent letters describing what he would do, how he would make me his wife whether I agreed or not. I went to the police, but his family has influence. No one would help me." Mrs. Chen was silent for a long moment, her weathered hand still on the dress she had been mending. "My cousin's husband is deputy here. I will speak with him. But Rose, you must be careful. Do not go anywhere alone after dark." Rose nodded, though she wondered what good being careful would do. Marcus had proven he could reach her anywhere. The day passed in a blur of needle and thread, of customers trying on dresses and discussing fabric choices. Rose went through the motions mechanically, her mind always circling back to Marcus's presence in town. What was his plan? When would he approach her directly? The questions gnawed at her until her head ached. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Rose prepared to walk home. Mrs. Chen insisted on accompanying her, and together they made their way through the dusty streets. The temperature had dropped with the approaching evening, and Rose pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. They were halfway to Rose's small, rented house when she saw Marcus again. He was standing outside the saloon, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Mrs. Chen saw him too and quickened her pace, practically pulling Rose along. "That is him?" the older woman asked. "Yes. He looks at you like a hawk looks at a rabbit." "This is very bad, Rose." They reached Rose's house, a modest structure at the edge of town with a small porch and a yard of packed dirt. Mrs. Chen waited until Rose had unlocked the door and lit a lamp inside before departing, making Rose promise to keep the door bolted. Alone in her house, Rose checked every window, every lock, then sat at her small table with a cup of tea she could not bring herself to drink. Night fell quickly in the desert, and soon darkness pressed against her windows like something alive. Every sound made her jump. The creak of settling wood, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the sage. She imagined Marcus out there in the dark, circling her house, planning his next move. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. Rose dozed fitfully in her chair, unwilling to go to her bedroom where she would feel even more vulnerable. She woke to the sound of footsteps on her porch. Her eyes flew open, her heart suddenly racing. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, the heavy tread of boots on wood. They moved from one end of the porch to the other, then stopped. Rose held her breath, straining to hear. Was Marcus trying to break in? Should she scream for help? But her nearest neighbors were 50 yards away, and she doubted they would hear her. The minutes stretched out. The footsteps did not resume, but neither did they retreat. Someone was out there, standing on her porch in the dead of night. Terror kept Rose frozen in her chair until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through her windows. Only then did she find the courage to move, creeping to the door and pressing her ear against the wood. She heard nothing. Slowly, hard in her throat, she drew back the bolt and eased the door open a crack. A man sat on her porch with his back against the railing, facing outward toward the street. He was not Marcus. Rose opened the door wider, confusion replacing her fear. The stranger turned his head to look at her, and she found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a lean, sun-weathered face beneath a broad-brimmed hat. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and scuffed boots with spurs that caught the morning light. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat but not rising from his position on her porch. His voice was deep and rough like gravel underfoot. "Who are you?" Rose demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite her confusion. "What are you doing on my porch?" "Name is Aaron Cole," he replied. "And I am keeping watch." "Keeping watch for what? For him?" Aaron jerked his head toward the street. "The man in the fancy suit who has been following you, Marcus Verne." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know his name? How do you know about me?" Aaron finally stood, unfolding to his full height of just over 6 feet. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own body, someone accustomed to long days in the saddle. "I came into town yesterday, heard some talk at the saloon." Verne was drinking, bragging to anyone who would listen about the woman he had followed from Kansas City, how she thought she could escape him, but he always gets what he wants. "He described you, mentioned where you lived. Did not sit right with me. So you decided to guard my porch?" Rose asked, incredulous. "Figured someone should. Man like that, he will make his move eventually. Better if you have someone watching." Rose did not know what to say. The gesture was both presumptuous and deeply touching. "I do not even know you. Why would you do this?" Aaron adjusted his hat, his eyes scanning the street even as he spoke to her. "My mother, before she passed, she had a man like that bothering her. Followed her around, would not take no for an answer. My father was already dead, and I was too young to do much about it. She lived in fear for 2 years before the man finally moved on to torment someone else. I swore I would never stand by and watch that happen again." There was something in his voice, a mixture of old pain and iron determination, that made Rose believe him. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motive, but found only honest weariness. "I appreciate the gesture," she said slowly, "but you cannot sleep on my porch every night. What about your own life, your work?" "I am between jobs at the moment," Aaron replied with a slight shrug. "Was working a cattle drive that ended in Flagstaff, heading down to find work on one of the ranches south of here. I can spare a few days or weeks, however long it takes." "However long what takes?" Aaron's eyes met hers directly. "However long it takes for him to give up and leave. Men like Verne, they are predators. They want easy prey. If he sees you are protected, that someone is willing to stand between you and him, he might decide you are not worth the trouble. Or he might hurt you," Rose said quietly. A small smile touched Aaron's lips, transforming his serious face for a moment. "He can try." Rose wanted to argue, to tell this stranger that she could not accept such a sacrifice from him, but the truth was she desperately needed help. She had been alone for so long, fighting her battles without allies, and the prospect of having someone on her side, even a stranger, made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "At least come inside for breakfast," she said finally. "If you are going to appoint yourself my guardian, the least I can do is feed you." Aaron hesitated, then nodded. He followed her inside, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Rose was acutely aware of how small her house was, how intimate it felt to have a man in her space. But Aaron seemed to sense her discomfort and positioned himself by the door, giving her as much distance as the small room allowed. She busied herself preparing coffee and frying eggs and bacon on her small stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. Aaron waited in silence, and Rose found herself stealing glances at him. He had a quiet presence, watchful and contained. Everything about him spoke of competence and self-sufficiency, from the way he stood to the well-maintained gun belt around his hips. "How long has Verne been following you?" Aaron asked as she set plates on the table. Rose sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "It started about 8 months ago in Kansas City. He was a customer at the restaurant where I worked. He began requesting my section every time he came in, leaving extravagant tips. At first it seemed harmless, even flattering. Then he started appearing other places, outside my boarding house, at the market where I shopped, at church on Sundays." She took a sip of coffee, the bitter warmth steadying her. "He sent flowers and gifts. I returned them all." When he finally asked me to dinner, I politely declined. He asked again the next day and the next. When I continued to refuse, he proposed marriage. Rose laughed, but there was no humor in it. We had never had a single conversation beyond me taking his order, and he proposed marriage. "What did you do?" Aaron asked quietly. I told him no, that I did not know him and had no interest in courting him. He acted as though I had not spoken. He told me we would be married in 3 months, that he had already begun making arrangements. When I said I would never marry him, his expression changed. Rose shuddered at the memory. It was like watching a mask slip. All the charm vanished, and underneath was something cold and possessive. He told me I would change my mind, that I belonged to him now, and the sooner I accepted that, the easier things would be. Aaron's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. After that, it got worse. Letters every day describing what our life together would be like, as though it was inevitable. He began following me openly, not even trying to hide it. I went to the police, but his family has money and influence. They dismissed me, suggested I should be grateful for the attention of such a prominent man. So I saved every penny I could and came west. I thought I had escaped. "He tracked you through the railroad," Aaron said. It was not a question. Rose nodded. "He must have." I was careful, but there are only so many routes west from Kansas City. They ate in silence for a few moments, then Aaron said, "I meant what I said. I will stay until he leaves. You have my word on that." "Why?" Rose asked again, searching his face. "You do not know me. This is not your fight." Aaron set down his fork, his blue eyes serious. "Because everyone deserves to be safe in their own home. Because you should not have to live in fear because some rich man thinks he can own you. And because it is the right thing to do." The simple honesty of his answer brought unexpected tears to Rose's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, embarrassed. "Thank you," she managed. "Truly?" Aaron nodded, then stood. "I should let you get ready for work. I will be outside." True to his word, when Rose emerged from her house an hour later, Aaron was sitting on her porch again, his hat pulled low against the rising sun. He stood when he saw her. "I will walk with you," he said, falling into step beside her as she headed toward town. Rose felt absurdly self-conscious with him beside her, aware of the curious glances from the few people already out and about. Aaron seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus constantly sweeping their surroundings. When they reached the dress shop, Mrs. Chen took one look at Aaron and raised her eyebrows. "This is Aaron Cole," Rose said quickly. "He is helping me with the situation we discussed yesterday." Mrs. Chen studied Aaron with sharp eyes, then gave a small nod of approval. "You have the look of a good man," she said. "Make sure you prove it." "Yes, madam," Aaron replied respectfully. He positioned himself outside the shop, settling onto a bench where he could watch both the door and the street. Rose tried to focus on her work, but she found herself constantly glancing out the window at his silent figure. True to his word, he did not move except to occasionally adjust his position, his eyes always alert. Around midday, Marcus Verne appeared. Rose saw him first, her hands freezing on the dress she was hemming. He walked down the boardwalk with the confident stride of a man who owned the world, his expensive suit and polished boots marking him as an outsider in this dusty frontier town. When he spotted Aaron sitting outside the dress shop, he paused, his eyes narrowing. Rose watched through the window as Marcus approached Aaron. She could not hear their conversation, but she could see Marcus's mouth moving, his expression haughty and dismissive. Aaron remained seated, his posture relaxed, but somehow conveying an unmistakable readiness. Whatever he said in response was brief, and Marcus's face flushed red with anger. The confrontation lasted only a minute or two before Marcus turned on his heel and stalked away. Aaron caught Rose's eye through the window and gave her a small nod of reassurance. When her work day ended, Aaron walked her home again. This time they did not speak, but Rose found the silence companionable rather than awkward. There was something solid and dependable about Aaron's presence, like a rock in a storm-tossed sea. That evening, as darkness fell, Rose heard Aaron's footsteps on her porch once more. She opened the door and found him settling into the same position as the night before, his back against the railing. "You cannot be comfortable like that," she said. "I have slept in worse places," Aaron replied with a slight smile. "This is luxury compared to bedding down on the open range with rattlesnakes for company." Rose hesitated, then said, "I have blankets, at least, and a pillow. Let me bring them out." "I would be grateful for that, thank you." She fetched the items, along with some leftover cornbread and beans for his dinner. Aaron accepted them with genuine thanks, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he took the folded blankets. "Aaron," Rose said, standing in her doorway, "what did Marcus say to you today?" Aaron's expression darkened slightly. "He told me to mind my own business. He said you were his fiancée and that I was interfering in private matters. I told him I would believe that when I heard it from your own lips, and that, until then, I was not going anywhere." "What did he say to that?" "Made some threats. Called me a saddle tramp and said I had no idea who I was dealing with. I told him his money and connections do not mean much out here, and that he should consider heading back to Kansas City before he finds himself in over his head." Rose felt a flutter of fear in her chest. "He will not take that well. Marcus is not accustomed to being challenged." "I am counting on that," Aaron said. "Men like him, they are used to intimidation working. When it does not, they get frustrated. Frustrated people make mistakes." Rose wished she shared his confidence, but she had seen the depths of Marcus's obsession. Still, she felt safer knowing Aaron was out there in the darkness, a barrier between her and the man who haunted her nightmares. "Good night, Aaron," she said softly. "Good night, Rose." The pattern continued for the next week. Each morning, Rose would emerge to find Aaron on her porch, sometimes dozing lightly but never fully asleep. He would walk her to work, spend the day watching over the dress shop, then escort her home and take up his position again at night. True to his word, he did not leave his post. During that week, Marcus made several more appearances, always watching Rose with that unsettling intensity, always trying to catch her alone. But Aaron was always there, a silent sentinel who seemed to anticipate Marcus's every move. The rich man's frustration grew increasingly visible. His expensive clothes became rumpled, his face drawn with lack of sleep. The town was too small and too public for him to make any overt moves against Rose, and Aaron's constant presence prevented any private confrontations. Rose found herself thinking about Aaron during the long hours at her sewing machine. She knew so little about him beyond his self-appointed role as her protector. Where was he from? What dreams did he carry? What had his life been like before he wandered into Seligman and decided to camp on her porch one evening as she brought him his dinner? She asked. "Where are you from, Aaron?" He was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of bread. "Colorado originally. Small ranch in the mountains near Boulder. My father worked cattle there until he died when I was 12. My mother tried to keep the place going, but it was too much for us. We lost it to the bank when I was 15. "I am sorry," Rose said, settling onto the porch steps near him. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of pink and purple. Aaron shrugged. "It was a long time ago. My mother found work as a cook in Denver, and I started hiring on with various cattle operations. Been moving around ever since." "Do you ever miss having a place to call home?" He looked out at the fading light, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes, But the thing about home is, it is not always a place. Sometimes it is a feeling or a person or a purpose. I have not found that yet, so I keep looking." There was something wistful in his voice that touched Rose's heart. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, countless pinpoints of light against the vast expanse above. "What about you?" Aaron asked. "What brought you west, besides running from Verne?" Rose drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Kansas City. I had been working just to survive, with no prospects beyond that. Coming west felt like a chance to build something of my own, to have a life that belonged to me and no one else." She laughed softly. "I suppose Marcus ruined that plan." "He has not ruined anything," Aaron said firmly. "You are still here, still building your life. He is just an obstacle, and obstacles can be overcome." Rose looked at him, at the determined set of his jaw and the sincerity in his eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, this near stranger, believed in her right to freedom and happiness with a conviction that moved her deeply. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Aaron met her gaze, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Then he nodded and returned his attention to the street, ever watchful. The days turned into 2 weeks, and Rose realized she had begun to look forward to her conversations with Aaron. He was easy to talk to despite his quiet nature, and he listened with genuine interest when she spoke about her dreams of one day opening her own dress shop, of creating beautiful things with her hands. In turn, he told her stories of his years on the cattle trails, of thunderstorms on the open plains and nights spent under endless stars, of the fierce beauty and harsh reality of frontier life. Mrs. Chen noticed the change in Rose, the softness that crept into her expression when she spoke of Aaron, the way she hurried through the end of each work day. "You care for him," the older woman observed one afternoon. Rose felt her cheeks flush. "He has been very kind." "It is more than kindness I see in your eyes, child, but be careful. The heart is a tender thing, and you have been hurt." "Aaron is not like Marcus," Rose said firmly. "No, he is not," Mrs. Chen agreed, "but that does not mean there is no risk in caring for him. Men like Aaron Cole, they are drifters. When his work here is done, he will move on. Can you accept that?" The question haunted Rose for the rest of the day. She had not let herself think about what would happen when Marcus finally gave up and left town. Aaron had no reason to stay in Seligman once his self-appointed duty was fulfilled. He would drift on to the next ranch, the next job, the next town, and she would be alone again, with only the memory of his quiet strength and steady presence. That night, she found herself lingering on the porch longer than usual, reluctant to go inside and end her time with Aaron. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation punctuated by comfortable silences. At one point, a coyote called in the distance, its lonely howl echoing across the desert. "You ever get lonely?" Rose asked. "Moving from place to place, never putting down roots?" Aaron considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially in the winter when the nights are long and cold. There are moments when I wonder what it would be like to have a home, a family, something permanent. But then I think about how that has never been my lot in life, and I make my peace with it." "Why does it have to be your lot?" Rose pressed. "You could choose differently." "Could I?" Aaron's smile was tinged with sadness. "I am 28 years old, Rose. I have no property, no savings beyond what is in my saddlebag, no trade beyond cattle work that will not last once my body gets too old and broken for it. What kind of life could I offer anyone?" "Maybe the life you could offer is not about money or property," Rose said quietly. "Maybe it is about who you are as a person. Your integrity, your courage, your kindness." Aaron looked at her for a long moment, and Rose saw something vulnerable in his eyes, a longing he usually kept hidden. "Is that what you think?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," she replied simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feeling. Then Aaron looked away, breaking the connection, and Rose felt the loss of his gaze like a physical thing. "You should get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is another day." Rose wanted to say more, to bridge the distance that had suddenly opened between them, but she only nodded and went inside, her heart aching with emotions she was not yet ready to name. The confrontation came on a Wednesday morning during the third week of Aaron's vigil. Rose was walking to work with Aaron at her side when Marcus appeared in the middle of the street, blocking their path. He looked haggard, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained, his eyes bloodshot from what Rose suspected was too much whiskey and too little sleep. "This ends now," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Rose, you are coming with me. We are leaving this wretched town and returning to civilization where you belong." "I am not going anywhere with you," Rose said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I have told you repeatedly that I will never marry you. Why can you not accept that? Because you are mine." Marcus shouted, drawing startled looks from the few townsfolk on the street. "I have invested months in you, followed you across half the country. You owe me." "She owes you nothing," Aaron said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "And you need to step aside and let us pass." Marcus's laugh was ugly. "Or what? You will shoot me. Go ahead, Cowboy. Everyone here will witness it. You will hang for murder and Rose will be left alone. Maybe that is what needs to happen for her to realize she has no choice but to accept my protection." Aaron did not rise to the bait. "I am not going to shoot you, Verne. But I am not going to let you take her either, so you have two choices. You can step aside or I can move you aside. Your preference." For a moment, Rose thought Marcus might actually attack Aaron. His hands clenched into fists, his face flushed crimson. But Aaron stood perfectly still, his hand resting casually on his gun belt, not threatening but making his readiness clear. Finally, Marcus stepped aside, but his eyes were fixed on Rose with a look of such venom it made her skin crawl. "This is not over," he hissed. "You think you can hide behind your cowboy, but he will leave eventually. They always do. And when he is gone, I will be here waiting. You will never be free of me, Rose. Never." Aaron placed his hand on the small of Rose's back, gently guiding her forward. They walked past Marcus in silence, and Rose could feel the weight of his stare boring into her back. She did not exhale until they reached the dress shop and were safely inside. "He is getting desperate," Aaron said quietly. "That makes him dangerous. What do we do?" Rose asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "We stay vigilant. He is close to breaking. Either he will give up and leave or he will try something foolish. Either way, it will be soon." Aaron was right. That night Marcus made his move. Rose was inside her house preparing for bed when she heard a noise at her back window. Her blood turned to ice. Moving as quietly as possible, she grabbed the small pistol she kept in her nightstand, a weapon she had purchased shortly after arriving in Seligman but had never imagined actually using. The sound came again, the scrape of something against glass. Someone was trying to open her window. Rose ran to the front door and yanked it open. "Aaron!" she called urgently. He was on his feet instantly, his gun already drawn. "What is it?" "Someone is at my back window." Aaron moved with startling speed, rounding the side of the house toward the back. Rose heard shouting, then a crash, then silence. She stood frozen in her doorway, her heart hammering until Aaron reappeared, dragging a struggling Marcus Verne by the collar. "Found him trying to pry open your window," Aaron said grimly. I think the marshal needs to hear about this." Marcus tried to wrench free, but Aaron's grip was iron. "Let go of me. You have no right. I was just trying to talk to her to make her see reason." By breaking into her house in the middle of the night, Aaron's voice was cold. "That is not talking. That is breaking and entering with intent to do harm." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Marshal Tom Garrett, a weathered man in his 50s who carried the authority of law in Seligman. "What is going on here?" the marshal demanded. Aaron explained the situation while Marcus sputtered protests, claiming he had been misunderstood, that he was only trying to protect Rose from the cowboy who had been harassing her. But the marshal was not swayed, especially when Rose showed him the letters Marcus had sent her over the past months, letters she had kept as evidence of his obsession. "Mr. Verne," Marshal Garrett said slowly, "I think you need to spend the night in a cell while we sort this out." "You cannot arrest me," Marcus protested. "Do you have any idea who my family is? We practically own Kansas City." "We are not in Kansas City," the marshal replied. "And out here, attempting to break into a woman's home in the dead of night is a crime, regardless of how much money your family has. Come along peacefully, or I will add resisting arrest to your charges." Marcus went, but not without shooting Rose a look of pure hatred over his shoulder. She shuddered and drew her shawl tighter around herself. Once the marshal had led Marcus away and the neighbors had returned to their homes, Aaron turned to Rose. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though she was trembling. "Yes, thank you, if you had not been here." "But I was here," Aaron said firmly, "and he did not hurt you. That is what matters." Rose looked up at him, at the concern in his blue eyes and the protective set of his shoulders, and something inside her broke open. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Aaron stiffened for a moment, clearly surprised, then his arms came around her carefully, holding her with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair. "I promise you are safe." They stood like that for a long moment, and Rose felt the terror of the past months beginning to drain away, replaced by something warmer and infinitely more fragile. She became aware of Aaron's heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and strong, of the warmth of his body and the clean scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. When she finally pulled back, she found Aaron looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was warmth in his eyes now, a softness she had not seen before, and something else that might have been longing. "Rose," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He seemed to struggle with the words, then said, "When this started, I told myself I was just helping someone in need, that it was the right thing to do, nothing more. But that is not true anymore, and I think you should know." Rose's heart began to pound for an entirely different reason. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about duty and became about something else entirely." Aaron's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. "It became about you. About the way you face your fears with courage, the way you find beauty in small things, the way your smile lights up your entire face. I have spent 3 weeks watching over you, and every day I have fallen a little more under your spell." "Aaron," Rose whispered, her eyes stinging with tears. "I know I have no right to say any of this," he continued. "I am just a drifter with nothing to offer you, but I could not let this chance pass without telling you how I feel. You have become precious to me, Rose. So precious that the thought of leaving here, of never seeing you again, feels like taking a knife to the heart." Rose reached up to cover his hands with hers. "Then do not leave," she said simply. "Stay here, stay with me." "How can I? I have no money, no prospects." You deserve someone who can give you the life you want, someone who can take care of you properly." "I can take care of myself," Rose said, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "I do not need someone to rescue me or provide for me. What I need, what I want, is someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my choices, who makes me feel safe not because he is controlling me but because I trust him completely. Someone who would sleep on a porch for weeks just to make sure I was all right, asking nothing in return." Aaron's eyes searched hers. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I care for you too," Rose replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have been falling for you since that first morning when I found you on my porch, this stranger who decided I was worth protecting. You make me laugh. You make me feel brave. And when you talk about leaving, I feel like I am losing something precious before I have even had a chance to truly have it." "Rose," Aaron breathed, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and gentle against hers. The kiss was sweet and searching, full of all the things they had been too afraid to say. Rose melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. She felt his arms tighten around her, pulling her closer, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt completely safe, completely cherished. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Aaron rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer," he said again, but his voice was lighter now, touched with hope. "You have yourself," Rose replied. "That is more than enough." They stood together under the star-filled sky, holding each other as the night wind whispered across the desert. Rose felt as though a weight she had been carrying for months, maybe years, had finally lifted. Marcus was in jail. Aaron was in her arms. And for the first time since leaving Kansas City, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a happy future. The next morning, Marshal Garrett came to see Rose with news. "Mr. Verne has agreed to leave town," he said. "I explained to him that if he ever sets foot in Seligman again or makes any attempt to contact you, he will be arrested and held for trial. I also sent a telegram to my counterpart in Kansas City, letting him know about the situation. Verne's family may have influence there, but they do not want the scandal of having their son arrested for harassing a woman. He will leave you alone." Rose felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Marshal. Thank you so much." "Thank Aaron," Garrett replied with a knowing smile. "He is the one who stood watch. Good man, that one. You could do worse." After the marshal left, Rose found Aaron waiting on her porch as usual, despite the fact that his watch was no longer necessary. When she told him about Marcus's departure, he smiled. "So it is over," he said. "Yes," Rose confirmed. Then, after a pause, "What will you do now?" Aaron stood, taking her hands in his. "Well, I was thinking I might look for work around here, see if any of the local ranches need an extra hand. That is, if you do not mind me staying in Seligman." Rose's heart soared. "I would like that very much." "There is something else," Aaron said, suddenly looking nervous. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know this is probably too soon, but Rose, I want to court you properly. Take you to dinner, go for walks, let you get to know me when I am not sleeping on your porch. Would you let me do that?" Rose laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I would like that very much." He pulled her close and kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the moment. When they parted, Rose felt as though her life was finally beginning, truly beginning, in a way it never had before. True to his word, Aaron found work at the Double Bar Ranch about 5 miles outside of Seligman. The owner, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Hayes, hired him on as a ranch hand after seeing how well Aaron handled the horses. The work was hard, but Aaron had never shied away from hard work, and it meant he could stay near Rose. He came into town whenever he could, which was usually twice a week on his days off. He would take Rose to dinner at the small restaurant by the train station, or they would go for walks in the evening, talking and learning about each other in the way of people falling slowly, inevitably in love. Rose discovered that Aaron had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. He learned that Rose had a passion for wildflowers and could name every variety that grew in the Arizona desert. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Aaron told her about his years of drifting and how empty it had sometimes felt, moving from place to place with no ties, no connections. Rose shared her memories of her parents and the grief that still sometimes caught her unaware. A sudden sharp pain in her chest at the sight of something that reminded her of them. Months passed in this way, a courtship that was both traditional and uniquely their own. Aaron was always respectful, never pushing for more than Rose was ready to give, but his devotion was unmistakable. He looked at her like she was something miraculous, something he could hardly believe was real. And Rose found herself looking at him the same way, this rough-handed cowboy with the gentle soul and the unshakable sense of honor. It was February when Aaron asked her to marry him. 6 months after that night he had first appeared on her porch. They were sitting on a blanket in the desert, watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of red and gold. Aaron had been quieter than usual all evening, and Rose had begun to worry that something was wrong. "Rose," he said finally, turning to face her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right," she said, her heart beginning to race. "Do you love me?" His blue eyes were serious, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "Yes," Rose said without hesitation. "I love you, Aaron Cole. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." Relief washed over his face, followed by a smile so bright it took her breath away. "That is good," he said, "because I love you too. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band, but to Rose it was more beautiful than any diamond. "I know it is not much," Aaron said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I cannot give you a fancy house or expensive things, but I can give you my whole heart, my loyalty, my respect, and every ounce of love I possess. Rose Langford, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Rose's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she managed through the lump in her throat. "Yes, Aaron, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time, drunk on happiness. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Seligman. Mrs. Chen helped Rose make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. Aaron wore his best clothes, which were still the practical garments of a working cowboy, but Rose thought he had never looked more handsome. Marshall Garrett gave Rose away, since she had no family of her own. Mrs. Chen stood as her witness, and Samuel Hayes stood for Aaron. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Aaron kissed Rose with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation wiped away tears. They had no money for a honeymoon, but Aaron had arranged to borrow a small cabin on the Hayes Ranch for a long weekend. It was isolated and private, surrounded by nothing but open land and sky. Rose had been nervous about the wedding night, but Aaron was patient and gentle, making her feel cherished every moment. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with care and wonder, and afterward lay tangled together, talking in whispers as the moon rose outside their window. "I never thought I would have this," Aaron said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. A wife who loves me, a place to belong. I thought I was destined to drift forever. Rose turned in his arms to face him. You are not alone anymore, she said. We belong to each other now. Wherever we go, whatever we do, we are home as long as we are together. Aaron kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me, he promised. I could never regret it, Rose whispered. You saved me, Aaron. Not just from Marcus, but from a life of fear and loneliness. You gave me hope again. You saved me too, he replied. From emptiness, from purposelessness. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something instead of always moving on. You are my home, Rose. You always will be. They made love again, slower and deeper this time, and Rose felt her soul entwining with his, two lonely people finding completeness in each other when they returned to Seligman. They moved into Rose's little house, which was cramped but cozy for two. Aaron continued working at the Double Bar Ranch, while Rose kept her job at the dress shop. They were not wealthy by any means, living on their combined modest incomes, but they were happy in a way that had nothing to do with money. Aaron proved to be a devoted husband. He helped with the housework without being asked, a rarity among men of that era. He brought Rose wildflowers from the range, their bright petals a splash of color in their simple home. When she had a difficult day at work, he would hold her and listen, offering comfort and understanding. And every night, before they went to sleep, he would tell her he loved her, the words never becoming rote or meaningless but always carrying the full weight of his heart. Rose blossomed under his love, becoming more confident and outgoing. She began designing her own dress patterns, creating garments that caught the eye of more affluent customers. Mrs. Chen encouraged her, teaching her advanced techniques and business skills. Within a year of their marriage, Rose had saved enough to begin seriously planning for her own shop. Aaron was her greatest cheerleader, pushing her to pursue her dreams even when she doubted herself. You are the most talented seamstress in the territory, he would say. Why should Mrs. Chen get all the benefit of that talent? You should be working for yourself. It took 2 more years of careful saving, but finally Rose had enough to rent a small storefront on Seligman's Main Street. Aaron built the shelves and display cases himself, working late into the night after his shifts at the ranch. When Rose's dress shop opened in the spring of 1887, it was a moment of triumph for both of them, a dream made real through hard work and mutual support. The shop was successful beyond Rose's hopes. Women came from surrounding towns to purchase her designs, which were both fashionable and practical for frontier life. She hired 2 assistants to help with the workload, and Aaron eventually quit his job at the ranch to help manage the business side of things, discovering he had an aptitude for numbers and customer relations. Their financial situation improved, allowing them to purchase a larger house with room to grow. And grow they did, in more ways than one. In the winter of 1888, Rose discovered she was expecting their first child. Aaron's joy was incandescent. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest and let him handle the heavy work. Rose found his protectiveness endearing but also exasperating, and they had their first real argument when he suggested she stop working at the shop entirely during her pregnancy. I am not an invalid, Rose insisted. Women have been having babies and working throughout history. I will be fine. I just want you to be safe, Aaron said, his voice tight with worry. Both of you. Rose softened at the fear in his eyes. She took his hands and placed them on her still flat belly. We are safe, she said gently, and we are strong. I know you worry, but you have to trust me to know my own limits. Aaron nodded, though his concern never entirely faded. He was there for every moment of her pregnancy, holding her hair when morning sickness struck, massaging her aching back in the later months, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but rest. Their son was born in July of 1889, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and a powerful set of lungs. They named him Thomas, after Rose's father, and Aaron cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the tiny life cradled in his arms. "He is perfect," Aaron whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Rose, he is absolutely perfect." Rose, exhausted but glowing with happiness, smiled at her two favorite people in the world. "He is ours," she said simply. "That makes him perfect." Aaron proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Thomas during the night when the baby was fussy, and sang lullabies in his rough voice until their son fell asleep. Rose would watch them together and feel her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but rich with purpose and joy. The dress shop continued to thrive, with Aaron now managing it full-time while Rose worked from home, caring for Thomas and creating new designs. They hired additional staff to handle the day-to-day operations, which gave them more time as a family. When Thomas was 2 years old, Rose became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and fatigue, and Aaron's protective instincts went into overdrive. But Rose was strong, and in the spring of 1892 they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Sarah, after Aaron's mother. Sarah was a quieter baby than her brother had been, with dark hair like Rose's and a contemplative gaze that made her seem wise beyond her infant years. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her, and Aaron had to be vigilant to make sure the enthusiastic 2-year-old's help did not become overwhelming. As the children grew, Rose and Aaron grew together as well, their love deepening and maturing. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they had learned to communicate honestly and work through problems together. Aaron never tried to control or diminish Rose, and she respected his opinions and valued his partnership. They were equals in their marriage, a rarity in an era when women were often expected to be subservient to their husbands. The dress shop expanded again in 1894, taking over the adjacent storefront when the general store relocated to a larger building. Rose now employed 6 seamstresses and had orders coming in from as far as Phoenix and Tucson. She had achieved the dream she had held since arriving in Seligman all those years ago, and Aaron had been there supporting her every step of the way. In 1895, when Thomas was 6 and Sarah was 3, Rose found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was unexpected but welcomed, and their third child, a son they named Jacob, was born in early 1896. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. The years passed in a blur of busy contentment. The children grew, bright and healthy and loved beyond measure. Thomas inherited his mother's creativity and his father's steady reliability. Sarah showed an early talent for drawing and painting, and Jacob was a whirlwind of energy who kept them all on their toes. Aaron and Rose grew older together, lines appearing at the corners of their eyes, silver threading through their hair, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered by shared challenges and sweetened by shared triumphs. One evening in the summer of 1900, when the children were all asleep and the house was quiet, Aaron and Rose sat on their porch watching the stars. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together at the end of each day, a way to reconnect after the busyness of family life. "Do you remember the first night I slept on your porch?" Aaron asked, his arm around Rose's shoulders. Rose laughed softly. "How could I forget? I opened my door expecting to find Marcus, and instead there was this scruffy cowboy sitting there like he had every right to be on my property." "I must have looked like a madman," Aaron admitted with a grin. "You looked like salvation," Rose corrected, turning to look up at him. "You looked like hope when I had none left." Aaron kissed her temple. "I fell in love with you almost immediately, you know. I told myself I was just helping someone in need, but the truth was, I saw you that first day and something in my heart just knew. This is the one. This is who I have been searching for." "I felt it too," Rose admitted. "It terrified me at first. I had just escaped one man's obsession, and here was another man inserting himself into my life. But you were different. You never tried to control me or make decisions for me. You just offered protection and asked nothing in return." "I would have been content with that," Aaron said. "Just knowing you were safe would have been enough. The fact that you chose to love me back, that you gave me a life and a family and a home, that is a gift I will never take for granted." Rose leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "We built a good life together, did we not? The best life," Aaron agreed. "Better than anything I ever dreamed of during all those years of drifting. You gave me a purpose, Rose. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had looked down on them that first night 17 years ago. So much had changed since then. They were no longer the frightened young woman and the rootless cowboy, thrown together by circumstance. They were partners, parents, business owners, pillars of their small community. They had built something real and lasting, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. "I love you," Rose said softly. "Thank you for sleeping on my porch all those nights. Thank you for staying when you could have drifted on. Thank you for choosing me." "Always," Aaron replied, pulling her closer. "I will always choose you, Rose, until the end of my days and beyond." The children grew into fine adults. Thomas became a skilled carpenter, building houses across the territory and eventually starting his own construction business. Sarah pursued her passion for art, her paintings capturing the stark beauty of the Arizona landscape in ways that drew collectors from across the country. Jacob followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a rancher, though with far more land and cattle than Aaron had ever dreamed of owning. All three children married and had families of their own, giving Aaron and Rose a house full of grandchildren who called them Grandpa and Grandma, and filled their later years with laughter and chaos. The dress shop eventually passed to Sarah's eldest daughter, who had inherited Rose's talent with needle and thread. Aaron and Rose grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp and their hearts forever intertwined. They celebrated their silver anniversary in 1911, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and half the town of Seligman. Marshall Garrett, now retired but still spry, gave a toast recounting the night he had arrested Marcus Verne and praising Aaron's devotion. "I have seen a lot in my years as a lawman," Garrett said, raising his glass, "but I have rarely seen a love as true and lasting as what these two people share. They built their marriage on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine partnership, and unwavering commitment. They are an example to us all." Aaron looked at Rose across the crowded room, and she looked back at him, and the love that passed between them was as strong as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps stronger for having weathered decades of life together. In the autumn of 1915, Aaron fell ill. The doctor diagnosed it as pneumonia and did what he could, but Aaron's lungs, weakened by years of exposure to dust and harsh conditions, could not fight off the infection. He lingered for 2 weeks, during which time Rose never left his side. She held his hand, read to him, reminded him of all the moments they had shared, the life they had built. "I am not afraid," Aaron told her one evening, his breathing labored but his eyes clear. "I have lived a full life, a happy life. You gave me that, Rose. You gave me everything that matters." "Do not talk like that," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to get better, you have to get better." But they both knew the truth. Aaron reached up with a trembling hand to wipe away her tears. "Listen to me," he said. "I need you to know that sleeping on your porch that first night was the best decision I ever made. Every moment since then has been a gift. You are my home, Rose. You always have been. And when my time comes to leave this world, I will go with no regrets, only gratitude for the years we had together." "I love you," Rose sobbed. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Aaron whispered. "Forever and always." He passed quietly 2 nights later, with Rose holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. He was 71 years old and had lived a life of purpose, love, and integrity. The entire town of Seligman turned out for his funeral, testament to the man he had been, and the respect he had earned. Rose grieved deeply but did not break. Aaron had taught her to be strong, to face life's challenges with courage, and she honored his memory by continuing to live fully. She spent her remaining years surrounded by family, telling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories of their grandfather, of the cowboy who had slept on a porch to protect a frightened woman and ended up finding his home. Rose passed peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1920, at the age of 81. She was buried beside Aaron in the small cemetery on the edge of Seligman, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names and the years they had lived. But their real memorial was the family they had created, the business Rose had built, the lives they had touched, and the example they had set of what love could be when built on respect, trust, and genuine partnership. Decades later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story of how it all began, with a frightened young woman being stalked by an obsessed man, and a drifting cowboy who decided to sleep on her porch until the danger passed. They would talk about how Aaron stayed night after night, asking nothing in return, until Verne finally gave up and left town. And they would talk about how that selfless act led to a love story that spanned 40 years and created a legacy that endured long after both Rose and Aaron were gone. Because in the end, that is what real love does. It endures. It builds. It creates something larger than itself, something that echoes forward through time, touching lives that will never know the original lovers but benefit from the foundation they laid. Aaron Cole and Rose Langford had loved each other with everything they had, and that love had changed the world, at least their small corner of it. Their story became legend in Seligman, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that true devotion means standing watch over another person's safety and happiness, expecting nothing in return but grateful for everything received. The old house where Rose had first lived, where Aaron had spent those weeks sleeping on the porch, still stood well into the 20th century. Eventually, it was torn down to make way for progress, but those who remembered would point to the empty lot and say, "That is where it happened. That is where the cowboy slept on the porch and won the heart of the seamstress. That is where one of Seligman's greatest love stories began." And in the telling and retelling, the story took on a life of its own, inspiring other acts of courage, other demonstrations of selfless love. Young men would hear it and aspire to be as honorable as Aaron Cole. Young women would hear it and refuse to settle for anything less than a partner who respected them as Rose had been respected. Parents would tell it to their children as an example of what real love looked like. Not the fleeting passion of infatuation, but the deep, abiding commitment that could weather any storm. The dress shop that Rose had built continued to operate for nearly a century, passed down through the generations of her family. Each owner kept a small portrait of Rose and Aaron in the back office, a reminder of the people who had started it all, of the love and partnership that had made everything possible. In the cemetery on the edge of town, fresh flowers appeared on Aaron and Rose's graves every year on the anniversary of the day they met, placed there by descendants who wanted to honor the couple who had given them life and legacy. The simple headstones bore witness to lives well lived, to a love that had conquered fear and built something beautiful out of very humble beginnings. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the desert wind whispered through Seligman, old-timers claimed you could feel the presence of that love still lingering, a warmth and steadiness that had seeped into the very bones of the town. They would point out houses that Aaron had helped build, dresses in the historical society that Rose had sewn, photographs of children and grandchildren who carried forward the values their ancestors had embodied. The story of Aaron and Rose became more than just a story. It became a touchstone, a reminder that love is not about grand gestures or sweeping romance, though those things have their place. Real love, enduring love, is built in the small moments, the daily choices to put another person's well-being alongside your own, the commitment to stand watch over their happiness even when it costs you something. Aaron had spent weeks sleeping on a porch, uncomfortable and exposed, asking nothing in return. Rose had trusted him despite every reason to be wary of men's intentions. Together, they had built a partnership based on equality and mutual respect, raising children who understood that love meant seeing your partner as a whole person, not a possession or a prize. That lesson rippled forward through the generations, shaping countless relationships and reminding people what healthy love looked like. In the end, Marcus Verne's attempt to control and possess Rose had failed utterly. His obsession had driven him back to Kansas City, where he eventually married a woman chosen by his family, living a life of wealth and privilege but, by all accounts, little happiness. He never forgot Rose, but she had long since forgotten him, having filled her life with so much love and joy that there was simply no room for the memory of his darkness. Aaron Cole, the drifting cowboy with nothing to his name but a horse and a saddle, had given Rose everything that truly mattered: safety, respect, partnership, and a love that never wavered. In return, she had given him a home, a family, a purpose, and the fulfillment of dreams he had not dared to dream. Their story, which began with fear and danger, ended in triumph and legacy. And every time someone in Seligman spoke of the cowboy who slept on the porch, they did so with reverence and warmth, grateful that such a love had existed in their town, grateful that its echoes continued to inspire and guide them. The stars that had looked down on Aaron that first night he took up his watch still shone over Seligman. The desert winds still whispered through the sage. The red rock still stood sentinel over the small town that had been the setting for such an extraordinary love story. And in the hearts of those who heard the tale, the spirit of Aaron and Rose lived on, reminding them that true love is not about possession or control, but about standing guard over another person's freedom to be themselves. And in that freedom, choosing each other again and again, every day, for all the days of their lives.